Hi there, this is Michael Leahy, Chairman of the Irish Freedom Party, coming to you on what is for me a very happy day in terms of European politics, and that is the day in which Italy has made a return to what I believe will be a central leadership role in European politics by the election of a patriotic and conservative government for the first time since the Second World War. The incoming Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, is a very exemplary figure. She is a compassionate and passionate woman, a real woman's woman, a patriotic person, and a Christian. We often find in this part of the world that women's politics is suffused with a kind of gender spite and a man hating socialist mentality. But certainly that's not all of what women's politics is. Many women are utterly alienated by the so called women's politics that is typical of countries like Ireland and other countries in Europe. But Giorgia Meloni has shown us a very radically different way of how women can participate in being patriotic and supporting family structure, in supporting the traditional values that have made Europe great and will do so again. I hope this will be a very historic moment for Europe. I hope it will bring Italy back into a significant leadership role. And we must always remember the extraordinary contribution that Italy has made as a country to the development of European culture, not just since, of course, ancient Roman times, but right throughout the Renaissance and up until the 19th century when it lost its way somewhat. Since the Second World War, Italy has certainly punched well below its weight in Europe. It has been kept in a somewhat secondary position by the hegemon of the Franco-German alliance, which has corrupted Europe to the point where it is functioning only in the interests of those two states and very much at the expense of the others. Um, the EU is already making noises about the results of this election. Of course, it will not be popular in the European Union. The Conservative Alliance, which has been put together in Italy, will, of course, no doubt be described as far right, in the same way that the Irish Freedom Party is always described as far right in this country. But I would remind you that many of the policies of the Italian Conservative Alliance are almost identical in every respect to the policies being espoused by the Irish Freedom Party. They involve respect for democracy, respect for the rule of law, respect for freedom of speech, acceptance of our traditions, a limit on warranted immigration into our countries. These are some policies which are supported by the vast majority of people, but they're absolutely despised by the authoritarian elites which control the European Union. The European Union has already made very dark noises. That dreadful person, Ursula von der Leyen, who should never have been elevated to any kind of a position of power, has already threatened Italy that the European Union has the tools to bring the democratically elected government of Italy to heel if it wishes to do so. What kind of a union do we inhabit? What kind of a political union do we have in Europe when a democratically elected government can be threatened by a non-entity who was never elected by anybody and never would be elected by anybody? It's now becoming very difficult for the European Union to continue to exercise its control over the member states because they are beginning to rebel in greater and greater numbers. It's not just Hungary now. Orban is no longer an isolated figure. Orban is one of the few genuinely democratic leaders left in the European Union, but now he's been joined by a party which cares for democracy in Italy as well. And there's also, of course, the election of a conservative government in Sweden, and there's the difficulties that the European Union is facing with Poland. Those are four substantial countries. The European Union is not going to be indefinitely able to attack substantial member states within its own borders. They've already lost Britain. And if they keep doing what they're doing, if the Franco-German alliance keeps doing what it's doing, it is going to alienate Italy as well. I'm not saying that this election is going to result in Italy withdrawing from the European Union. But if people like von der Leyen continue in the direction that they're going, that may well be what happens. And if that happens, then so be it. Um, the European Union, I have long concluded, is not capable of reform. It has been designed to prevent reform. It has been designed to prevent a genuine democratic input from its people or from its member states into how it runs. And if it cannot accept the need for reform, if it cannot understand the need for reform, then it may be as well that it breaks apart and a new trading bloc of some kind be put in place which respects the rights and liberties of its people and of its member states. European Union is essentially a deeply, deeply dysfunctional political organization. I think we've seen that in its response to the present crisis in Ukraine. We've seen it in the entirely ideologically driven response to the so-called climate change. The European Union is going to create a worldwide international catastrophe in terms of food supplies by its utterly crazed attachment to zero carbon by 2050, which will utterly destroy the industrial base of Europe and is doing so already. That may be very precipitate. That may begin to happen from this winter forward. And we may be in for a very, very difficult time this winter as a result of European Union policy driven by the crazed climate agenda. This will always happen in any political organization which is dysfunctional, which does not answer to its people, and where the principal players do not need to face an electorate. What else do you think is going to happen other than that they will engage in utterly destructive politics? We in this country need to look to our future. There is a real possibility of a serious crisis emerging throughout Europe this winter, and we need to decide now, where do we stand? Do we stand with the genuine Democrats, the genuine patriots who want a functioning political system in Europe, or do we stand with the communist authoritarians of the Brussels elite? Because we may be forced into making that decision very quickly. The last thing we want is to see a precipitate collapse of the European Union. So we've got to start thinking of ways of how we can come together with a new structure that works for all the member states. Certainly what we've got at the moment does not do so. I think we could be looking at a situation within a very short space of time where the entire European Union may begin to unravel. There are other major countries, such as France, where you could see within in a very short space of time a complete turn away from the destructive policies of the European Union. We don't get much sight of this in Ireland because our national media never reports what's happening in the other countries of Europe. The enormous farmer protests, agricultural protests in Holland, we simply don't know about them, we never hear about them. But this is a series of protests which has been organised to try to protect the food supplies that the Dutch farmers have produced, and which are to be destroyed as a result, by the way, of judicial activism. And this is going to lead to food crises within not just within Holland, but within the many countries to which it exports. It's one of the largest exporters of food in the world. If the European Union keeps going with the ideologically driven madness which it suffuses, it will create a serious catastrophe leading to the loss of many hundreds of millions of people. It is no exaggeration to say that the Holocaust, which the Green Agenda within the European Union is about to precipitate, may be of an order of magnitude worse than the Holocaust of the last World War. So just think about that for a minute. You may say that these people are doing this for good reasons, that they're doing this to save the planet. I don't believe that for a moment. I think the real agenda of the Green Party, which is an inherently evil political system, is not a love of the planet, but a contempt and hatred for the human race. And I think they're quite happy to condemn millions upon millions of people to premature death, to starvation, in order to save some notion of the planet in the future, which they really don't understand and is based on entirely tenuous science in any event. We in Ireland need to figure out what we're going to do, where we're going to stand, and what I believe will be a precipitate crisis. We need to do so fairly quickly. The Irish Freedom Party will represent your interests. We are deeply Eurosceptic. We want to see a Europe that works for all of us. That means a trading bloc, not a political communist regime, which is what we have at present and which is what is in formation. So with that, on this very, very good day for Europe, I think this may be a very historic day indeed, and I hope it will be. I'd like to wish you a good day. We need to start thinking outside the box. We need to start realizing we do not have a proper political culture either in Europe or in Ireland, and we need to develop one quickly if we are not to have a precipitate collapse of the European Union. Thank you.